Let's sing glory!
Today we're sitting down with Jason Logan, creative director, graphic designer, author, ink maker, and the founder of the Toronto Ink Company. He's somewhere on the color spectrum between being this alchemical wizard, an artist and father who sees the importance of color and how, on a subconscious and conscious level, it relates to and conducts our very lives, yet still manages to retain his bright eyes and bushy tail. And I guess that's the most important part. A total child ready to pounce on the next acorn he comes across, or, on the contrary, cigarette butts. Because acorn caps make for silver, whereas tobacco, golden hues. It's in this bridging of our natural world with that of our man-made domains that Jason seeks to imprint his own life into that of his palettes. Roses are red, and if violets look blue, that's because anthocyanins can vary in hue. I've got Twitter to thank for that one. This is Palette with Jason Logan. A quick heads up, we're dealing with an overseas conversation here, so the audio may reflect this. Coming to you from Toronto, Canada, and Amsterdam, the Netherlands.
I guess that I am someone who is curious about experimenting with my hands and I guess all of my senses and exploring the world through materials.
And you mentioned that you're pretty into gutsiness. What's your relation like with your intuition and gut?
I guess I feel like part of what I do, both as like an ink maker and just as a kind of like artist that likes to experiment, is I sort of always start with my body in a way. Like I like to go out into nature or into the city or find a sort of place that's really interesting to me and sort of follow my feet and hands where they lead me. So I guess the gut part there is just maybe more of an intuitive being drawn to things. I think a lot comes through your intuition when you wander around.
At what point did intuition become an active component within your own life?
I think I've always been a bit of a wanderer, and I'm trying to think of. These are like really. I love your questions, but they're also like they're sort of questions I've never been asked before. So I'm just trying to like sort of think them through as you're saying them. It's cool. Like I just feel like I've been on this sort of book tour with my ink making, and I feel like I always get the same sort of set of 10 questions, which I feel like I have really clear answers for, and you're kind of like pushing me in directions that I'm not used to going. So it's like both satisfying, and it might take me a minute to kind of like acclimatize my brain to that like line of questioning. But it's cool. It feels good.
Okay, cool.
Let me think. Like, I'm just trying to figure out the best way to answer that question. I think like as a kid, I spent a lot of time just like by myself in nature, kind of going into a kind of contemplative place. Like I just remember spending a lot of time with like sticks and sand and like kind of being somewhere in the woods and just like very carefully looking at like the way like a little bud was appearing on a branch or something, and I kind of have that. It kind of goes a long way back in my history, this feeling of sort of kind of getting in touch with nature in a way that's sort of not really based on words or art or anything, but just more of a like communing with nature or something. And I also remember really strongly like connecting with like certain landscapes. I was really into train tracks, and I remember being really into grapevines, and I think that those really early childhood connections to certain places and like species of plants and weeds and certain rocks and geography like that feels like the beginning of something intuitive,
Yeah.
Like something that I was just sort of drawn to magnetically. And then, I'm now in my mid-40s, and I'm sort of just coming back to some of those early fascinations, So I feel like something was set in motion at a very young age in terms of my guts. And I think that, I sort of spent, I don't know, like 20 or 30 years doing like graphic design and art direction and creative direction and putting together books and working as an illustrator and doing things that were very based on other people's needs and kind of exacting specifications. And then I started wandering again and making my own ink, and I feel like I'm kind of coming back to that sense of just following myself, kind of, So
yeah, it's where
I think I'm sort of maybe like I was a gutsy, like it's like I was, and then I spent a lot of time kind of not following my gut, and then I'm sort of feel like I'm back my gut again,
Yeah, it comes full circle, and it's beautiful how when you hear, as a child, so many people were almost where they needed to be and who they at their core really are, and there's so much noise and we lose all of that along the way. And then we have kind of that midlife moment where you come back to yourself. Did you find that your family, did they give space to that when you were a child? Were there any people that you looked up to that also were very in tune with themselves?
Well, I grew up in a bunch of different places. My dad was a minister, and we moved around to a lot of little small towns. And so I think, and I found it hard, I think because we did so much moving, I found it hard to like connect with like other kids or mentors, So I feel like a lot of my connection at a young age was with the places I was in, and I feel like a lot of what I learned through almost like the landscape itself. My parents were pretty supportive of, like, they were open, very connected with nature and open to, working with your hands and all kinds of, like, there definitely were sort of skills that I learned, but I think, I guess in terms of the journey, it does feel like kind of it was sort of a solo thing as a young kid.
Yeah, especially when you don't have those immediate human connections, and it's almost like that dialogue with the environment, as the environment is something that you're always going to be surrounded with. That's where you found grounding and turned to. So from what I've learned, you've worn, and you wear many hats, but the biggest transition, it seems to me, is that when you made that perspective switch on the materials you were using as an artist in relation to the bigger picture, ethicality and sustainability. And this also runs in parallel to you becoming a father, but I'd love it if we could speak a little about that moment and how this inner dialogue came about, and what were those first immediate steps you also took in integrating this into your workspace as an artist?
Yeah, well, I was pretty clear, like, when I had my first kid, I was pretty clear that I wanted to be an artist that could work in my own home, So I kind of wanted to be able to make art and think about materials like, in my kitchen or like in my upstairs studio. Like I didn't want to separate my art from my kind of domestic life. So that felt important to me. And also the idea that, when you go to the art supply store and you look at the back of your art supplies, they almost all have like a toxicity warning on them.
Yes.
And I really felt like, why do colors have to be poisonous? So I was very interested in the idea of finding art materials that I could use that, in some cases I make art materials that are actually edible, but I really wanted, sort of non-toxic art supplies that I could use with my kids and feel like they were beautiful and had subtlety and had all the things that I wanted, and that they were also non-toxic. And that just sort of led me naturally to, it sort of forced me to do some real experimenting, because there's just not a lot out there and available that's natural and non-toxic in terms of art supplies.
When you got more into this, did you find that there was more of a community already practicing within this space? Or was it really, once again, like a very solo journey? And because I'm seeing that your inks are being stocked in places such as Japan, and via Toronto Ink Company, the Instagram account, I found so many amazing people as well. But when you first started, did you find that there was somewhat of a platform, or not really?
Well, when I first started, I can't believe that there's nothing really anywhere to be found about how to make ink, or even like when you think about the ink in your pens, like what is it made out of? Like there's no, they don't give you an ingredient list anywhere, and it was really hard to kind of get to the bottom of like, how did people used to make ink? How do people even make it now? And what are some of the recipes that people are experimenting with? And I found, when I started, I found almost nothing. There was a bit of information about black walnut, which is a really easy one to make and one of my favorite colors and inks. But beyond that, there was very little to be discovered. So, one of the big things that I did in the last few years was I made a book, and the book is kind of the book that I wished I'd had when I started this out, because I did feel so alone. But the amazing thing, like, not to make it an ad for Instagram, but like the amazing thing for me was just that when I just started posting, kind of as soon as I started the company, I started posting to Instagram just as the kind of like, here's what I just made, like, and this is how I made it, and by being kind of open about the process and what I was liking and certain material combinations and what they looked like on paper, by sort of doing that in a really open way, I discovered that there's a huge community. It's all over the world, people experimenting with making their own art supplies and non-toxic color, and people, carving their own pens, and people looking deeply into like medieval alchemy recipes around ink. And it's just, and then there's like poets and writers who love ink and will only work with a dip pen, and there's just I think once you, here's like a gutsy thing, is just once you really clearly sort of show people what you're up to, the amount that you get back is just unbelievable. I thought I was alone, and I wasn't alone at all, actually.
You opened up, and it's when people kind of get over that part of standing in their own way and really putting out there what they're doing, that's when that human connection really happens.
Yeah, it's just like taking that leap. Like when I first started posting, I think some of my friends in the publishing industry and stuff were like, "You're doing what? Like you're like things you pick up off the street, and you're like making that into like they." And it looks kind of messy, and I just it was sort of like almost embarrassing when I first started putting it out there, and I think people weren't getting it, and but I sort of just kept going, and I think the more you're able to like show your kind of almost your weirdest side, if you're able to show the failures that you're making and the sort of back end of things and all the peculiar things that come out along the way, I feel like it's that. There was a kind of visual honesty there that was just harvested an amazing collection of collaborators and other artists and other like material experimenters and scientists, and yeah, it really opened up a kind of a window and also a door, I guess, for me.
Yeah, getting really comfortable with being uncomfortable and vulnerable.
Yeah. And that's a continual process too, like you sort of, I think you have to sort of keep pushing those limits, because I think it's easy to sort of open yourself up once and start to get some feedback from that and then sort of stop there, Like, I think that really showing what you're up to is something that's a kind of continual process.
Since having grown this platform, at what point along this process did you start to think about making this an accessible resource and commodifying the inks? From this moment of this true grit, scrappiness, and people judging you to being like, this is an actual product and I want to make it accessible for people.
Well, I actually, right from the start, I liked the idea of calling it the Toronto Ink Company and kind of giving it a kind of at least a commodity name. And I first, I started with the black walnut ink, which I discovered on the way to work one day. And basically, from after about a week of experimenting with the black walnut hulls and making this nice, rich, dark brown ink, I kind of immediately put it into bottles and designed a little label for it and kind of made it feel like a company, made it feel professional and feel like a company. And I packaged up the inks and I sent them off to illustrators and artists around the world that I loved and had worked with before. So I started off almost immediately with a feeling of I want this to be a kind of a company. But it was just that's kind of as far as it went. It was still me just sort of experimenting in my kitchen with my kids, and then it had this sort of overlay of I wonder what this would look like in the hands of artists and illustrators that I love. And then I think just as I started to get feedback, I got feedback from artists, I got feedback from every once in a while, a company would call me. I was contacted, I guess a couple years ago now, by a press in Michigan who wanted to make a limited edition set of black inks, and I worked with them to make a nice set of 5 black inks, all made 5 different ways. So it kind of forces you to kind of really examine what that color black is. So that was sort of a commission and a job, and I, produced a beautiful box for it, and really worked on the labels and really, really worked on the recipes. And then not long after that, I was contacted by Harley Davidson, who wanted to make a ink based on coffee. So I did a project with them and a screen printing company, and really figured out how to make coffee ink. So I think as I sort of put myself out there and showed what was possible in the world of ink in terms of kind of storytelling and experimentation, I started to get commissions. And I think that once you start getting people asking for specific things, it starts to feel a little bit more, I guess, of the world rather than just purely personal,
Yeah.
And then, a lot came from just that Instagram account and the sort of the way in which I presented the combination of sort of materials experimentation and what that looks like on paper as art, kind of. And out of that, I was contacted by this guy, John Gall, who's one of my favorite book cover designers of all time, and he had just started a job at Abrams Book as their commissioning their art and design books, and he just out of the blue, he'd seen my Instagram account, and he just sort of out of the blue contacted me and said, could we turn this into a book? Could we turn this account into a book? And I said, yes, we can. Let's do it. And then I had to figure out how that worked.
And since having founded the Toronto Ink Company as well, where have you found that the biggest demand for these products and this knowledge is actually coming from?
Well, there are different pockets around the world. I think because it's the Toronto Ink Company, there are a lot of people in Toronto who just love the idea of telling little micro stories within Toronto, so there's that population. And then In Japan, there's like a really particular relationship with ink and color and art materials that goes back like thousands of years, and there's something in what I'm doing that's found an audience in Japan, and I work with a couple Japanese artists who just have such an attention to sort of details and material, and that's sort of opened me up to a whole way of thinking. Australia has like an amazing scene of fascination with ochre and iron-based color, and I've met a couple artists who work with making their own like brushes and pens and stuff out of weird sticks and things that they find. Like there's just a real peculiar and amazing scene in Australia around kind of makers of art supplies. I just got back from California. I just did a little sort of mini tour of California, and there's like an extraordinary scene there of just a real relationship to the kind of non-toxic and natural color, and a lot of natural dyeing and harvesting of plants in California. That was a real eye-opener for me. Like so many amazing sort of new collaborators and experimenters there that I met. It's in pockets. It's in pockets all over the world. I don't know. I've been calling it the color revolution. Like I feel like this idea that color doesn't have to be in the hands of just a few, German chemical producers, but it's something that humans used to know a lot about and used to get a lot of kind of like almost spiritual energy from. Anyway, I think it's time to bring that back.
Yes, we shouldn't have to be afraid of the color that we use. Color is so representative of emotion, and it has auras, and it's so widely diverse, and it's so powerful in how it can shape the way we feel, especially in branding and all the commercials and advertisements and everything that is thrown at us all day long. But I love how you really reference it as being a spiritual factor as well. And the ink itself is so much more, it's just so much more in that we need a more conscious and intention-based approach to how we're conducting our lives. From seeing it within the food and the fashion industry, we are slowing down and truly looking at the impacts our actions carry. And in your own work, I really love how you touched on it being this revolution, and that commercialized ink, such as the ones we use in a domestic setting, to the art supply store and on a bigger scale, it can just be sustainable and responsibly sourced. And your book is definitely, I feel, a step in this direction where it's going to familiarize and educate people and really let them take this step within their own lives. But in touching on that, it is this revolution. How have you handled maybe, say, some of the feedback? Because I've read some of the reviews and that people are struggling with, say, some of the preservation of like the ink, and in that taking on as a serious craft. How are you moving forwards with these obstacles, and how does the Toronto Ink Company play into this?
Well, I mean, I think there are, the book kind of introduces people to a world of like foraging, natural color. There's like 12 or 13 recipes in there that are all sort of like pretty easy to work with, and I think one piece of the feedback that I've had is like people are like, well, this is these recipes are pretty basic, and they almost wish for more depth or more complexity there. And I kind of felt like I purposely wanted to just offer like a place to start, rather than trying to give every tiny detail of a million different recipes. I sort of wanted to give people things that I know work and just kind of give you immediate feedback, and then let people kind of experiment from there. Because I think that what I'm most interested in is this idea of opening people's eyes to like the color that's all around us. And when you kind of give people really exact step-by-step information, you're kind of taking it out of that realm of the personal. Like I just really wanted to give people enough information that they could kind of then play in whatever way they wanted to play. And I think there's lots of room there for people to invent their own recipes or go deeper into any of these recipes, or hopefully improve on. I hope that people will read my book and feel like this is just the beginning.
Yeah.
The other kind of feedback that I get a lot, I don't know if you were referring to this as well, but a lot of people talk about, especially when people make ink, they want it to be archival, like they want it to last forever.
Yes.
And this is a big thing in the world of natural color, is like, people are like, well, wait a second, will this fade though? Or like, is it light fast? Or is it like, how long will it last? Or I'm an artist, and if I use your inks, like, will they, and then I sell them to someone, like, will they fade over time? I get a lot of these kind of questions about natural ink, because the thing about, if you go to an art supply store or a stationery store and get a bottle of, like, say, intense blue ink that's your favorite color, blue, it's the same. It's just very stable. Like, ink is in general really stable, so it's the same every time. It reacts the same every time. It lasts for a long time. It's archival. It's light fast. That's what you get from synthetic color. But it's dead. And if you make your own bottle of, say, wild grape ink, it's not necessarily light fast. It might be fugitive. It might fade over time, but it is changing and it's unexpected, and it gives you all these like amazing results that you were never planning, and it's got the beauty of being alive.
Everything's becoming very experiential based. Like, retail isn't just a retail store anymore. Everything is becoming an experience, and with these inks and foraging and bringing this all onto whatever medium you may use as an artist, you're really bringing the grit and like the minerals of the earth and your surroundings to your canvas.
I think there's a reason that fashion and retail and like a lot of our kind of commercial world is moving towards something experiential. I think it's just because it's actually more satisfying, like there's something about, and especially when you're able to connect to it personally, like if you go out and you find some little weird nut or seed pod or something on your walk with a friend, come back and you take it home and you put it in a pot and you boil it up for like a couple hours, and even if the color that you get is a sort of subtle yellowy brown color, if you've made it yourself and you put it on a piece of paper and you sort of look carefully at it and watch it sort of shifting and changing, and it gets a little grainy and it's kind of moving around on the page in unexpected ways, like the satisfaction that you get from that is just you can't compare it to some bright orange that you buy at the H&M store or something, like it's a color that becomes yours, and it's connected to the memory that you have of going out there into the woods and having a walk with your friend or whatever it was that sort of led you to that color. I just think when you add story and experience to a color, you get something really just like deeply satisfying and powerful.
It's of you, and it's of the earth, and it speaks to all the places you've been and where you currently are, and it holds a little part of you in it. And
yeah. I mean, think of it. Even imagine just like for traveling, like you instead of like sending a postcard back home to your family, if you're able to, make a color from that place and make a little bottled landscape of the place that you're traveling to, and even if just you put a little blob of that color on a piece of paper and send it out as a postcard, like that becomes a real marker of where you've been.
Like a palette of where I am right now. This is so cool.
Yeah. And it's not just like you get these subtle, unexpected colors that really have story behind them, but they have a scent and they have a texture and they have they're alive. They're alive in a way that nothing you get at an art supply store is alive.
Yep. And bringing it back a little closer to home, how has this dialogue with your surroundings and color been a part of family life, and especially that of your children?
I've got 3 kids, and the youngest one has just got an absolute eye for all of the plants, weeds, rocks, like little things that I've pointed out to her that are great for collecting to make ink. So she's constantly on her walk home from school will be finding the little, there's a plant called lamb's quarters that grows these little pink dots on it, and it's only like 1 in every 100 of these weeds that have the little pink dots on them, but she notices it every time and always brings me home a couple of leaves with these little pink dots on them, and then we grind them up with a little vinegar, and you can kind of really bring that pink color out of them. So she's like my foraging expert. My middle son is really interested in some of the like labeling and naming the colors, and he's kind of like the packager and graphic designer. My oldest son is interested in some of the alchemy and cooking. So each child has their own kind of interest in what I'm doing, and it's amazing how ink making can just sort of bring out kind of a bunch of different exploratory qualities. And I wouldn't say it's just in kids, but I think kids are amazing they kind of open up my eyes to things because they don't have any prejudices around what should or could be made into ink. I've got a story in my book about I sometimes do kids' birthday parties, and we go out on a foraging mission, and then we make our own inks and package them up. And there was a party that we had for my oldest son, and his friend Otis started collecting cigarette butts off the street. He said, can we make ink out of this? And of course I said yes, because I just, that's my policy is that I say yes to anything. And then we took them home, and it turns out that tobacco actually makes an amazing, really beautiful and strange ink, So sometimes it's a kind of attitude in kids of like not making any separation between what is a plant and what is a weed and what is, there's just this amazing sort of formless quality to the way that kids approach ink making that I find really inspiring. And
yeah, there's like this structure that we may gain over time as we reach adulthood that hasn't quite crept into their perspectives yet. But have you seen that through the community of your kids when they're hanging out with their peers? Have they, say, introduced this within their own friendships?
Yeah, I think they're spreading the word, It's I think kids are really fascinated by tactile stuff, but I think they also I don't know, all kids are different actually. It's hard to make generalizations, but I do think that there's a bit of a popularity around when you think of the popularity of slime, I think
oh my God, yeah.
The ability, the ability to just sort of do, to make mud pies or to make slime or to do something with your hands where you get to see kind of goopy transformation in a kind of immediate way, I think that's something that spreads like a virus, I think there's something in that my kids have been able to share with their friends, and I hope it just keeps spreading this notion that it's possible to make color from almost anything.
And what are your favorite ingredients?
I love iron. I think iron is amazing because you've got you got rusty nails and bits of like rust, which is always like, it's sort of something found in every city, and it kind of often defines like a certain neighborhood. Like the kind of rust that you see is really interesting. And then also iron-based pigments from rocks. So all the like ochre colors of human history are made from an iron base. And I'm interested in iron just because it has this, the kind of chemistry and physics of iron is really interesting. The electrons do all kinds of amazing things depending on what environment you put them in. So if you add a rusty nail to a bunch of acorns, you get a beautiful sort of silvery color. If you add, a piece of iron to vinegar, you get this iron water, which has like a million different colors in it. So I'm interested in iron as an ingredient. I love wild grapes because there's so much that goes on there. You can make black ink from carbonizing the vines of wild grapes. You can use the juice of wild grapes to make a beautiful, rich purple color. You can use the sap that's in the wood of grapevines to make a binder that works in all kinds of different inks. So I love wild grapes. I love drywall dust. Like, I love the color white. Turmeric is amazing. I mean, it's sort of, it depends on the day. Like, I'm really in love with all kinds of materials and ingredients.
And what have you found has been the hardest color to make?
Weirdly, green has been really difficult. Even though our world is, if you see it from outer space, you sort of see blue first and then you see green. And there's so much, all living plants are, based on chlorophyll, and so there's so much green in the world that it's a really hard color to extract from things. So finding a bright green has been very difficult. I make kind of like a golden green from buckthorn berries, which you kind of have to do a bit of pH balancing and chemistry to make it work, but it does make a beautiful golden green color. But a kind of bright green has eluded me.
I don't know. So I remember climbing trees when I was younger, and I'd always have so much, like the moss would rub off on me. Have you ever experimented with moss?
No, I haven't actually. I had an artist, one of the artists that I collaborate with. I get a lot of stuff in the mail, and one of the artists that I collaborate with just sent me a Ziploc bag full of moss from a tiny little island. So that might be my afternoon project today.
Yeah.
Moss is a beautiful green color.
Yeah. It was always so dang hard to remove the stains. I'm like, oh, that might be something.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I actually was contacted about a year ago by a grass company asking to make a grass green, and it's true, like it stains. It's weird. Green will stain clothes and stuff, but then it's very hard to like juice it to get a stable liquid version of that green. Not impossible, but difficult.
Where would you like to travel next and kind of experience and pull from what the environment has to offer there?
I would really love to go to the Middle East, just where some of the very first writings of human history began, in Mesopotamia. And for instance, there's a kind of ink called Ogal ink, which is kind of a really archival dark black ink that's got this kind of amazing long history. And little oak galls that you use to make it, which are they're actually made by wasps. The best oak galls come from Aleppo, and I've always thought like I could go to Aleppo and collect oak galls there. There's a bunch of the kind of traditional ingredients of ink making come from, either Egypt or the kind of Mesopotamia area. So I'd be interested to sort of look into that realm and to maybe see some of the museums with like the first writings on papyrus and kind of get into that history. I'd also I've never been to Japan or China, and that is also one of the birthplaces of ink. The ink is mostly in a solid form. That's just a whole different world, the world of ink sticks. So that's something I'd love to sort of research further and look into.
That would be amazing. I can already see books dedicated to the colors of these cities and these countries. That'd be so cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, every little place has its own. You can do a palette for every little place, So it's this is kind of what I want to do for the rest of my life. There's a whole globe to open up.
Yeah, it's the obscurities and the nooks and crannies of the world.
Yeah.
Before we close out, just want to ask if you could give an example of a time in your life where it was guts versus logic and you went with your gut.
Yeah, that's a good one. Well, this year, because I've been on a book tour, I've ended up in a few different sort of places where I was forced to kind of just sort of ad-lib what I was doing, and what comes to mind when you ask that question is my trip to Washington, D.C. I was asked to go down there and do some foraging with the NPR, the National Public Radio in Washington, D.C., and I was really excited. I was kind of excited to be on radio talking about ink, and I thought that would be amazing, and they really wanted to do a foraging mission with me, and I was a little bit nervous because I had no idea what you could forage in Washington, D.C., and I didn't have a lot of time to figure it out. I just sort of came the night before, and then I was going to be foraging with them in the morning, and so I sort of sent out a call on Instagram to people saying, what can I find in Washington, D.C.? Does anyone know where a black walnut tree is? I just sort of asked some questions and found a kind of network of, there were some amazing foragers, there were some witches, there was a great chocolate maker, and they all kind of went out on the streets looking for black walnut trees for me, and a few other ingredients that I knew would be interesting to find. And then the information came back, and it was all in different parts of Washington, D.C., and nothing was anywhere near the radio station, and they had found one black walnut tree, but there was no black walnuts on it, and so I sort of ended up, after much searching and research and fiddling around, I ended up basically with 10 minutes before my interview and no idea what I was going to find on my foraging mission, and then I just before I got to the NPR building, I saw this little alleyway, and I was like, that sort of looks like my kind of alleyway. And I rented a bike, and I got off my bike, and I just started slowly walking down the alley. And the closer I looked, the more I realized I'm like, oh, there's a bunch of first I saw some broken glass, and then I saw some cigarette butts, and I was like, oh, I guess I could talk about the cigarette butts, and then I saw, what did I see next? Oh, I saw a penny, and I was like, yeah, I can definitely talk about copper and pennies. And then right beside me, there was a beautiful little stand of chicory that were coming out of a crack in the sidewalk, and that chicory root is one of the ones that I love to use. And I just realized, all my searching around Washington, D.C., and all my, trying to prepare for this interview, it was really it was all in this alley, all the materials that I needed to talk about how you could make color from a city were just sitting here in this alley and the alley was literally 5 minutes away from the building. And I saw it with my eyes, I was just drawn to it, and I knew that this was the right alley for me. And I just followed my gut. I mean, I think it's a critical kind of knowledge that we have in our bodies.
Yes. I love how you were going to be interviewed about foraging, and when we're put in situations like that, we really try and prep and prepare and set up the entire schedule. But here you are, it's about foraging, and you really just had to just forage.
Yeah, I just had to do it. It's amazing what happens when you just sort of get almost out of your brain and into your body. I mean, I think that's why I was excited to talk to you today. It was just, it's a trick, we just spent so much time planning and thinking and trying to figure out things, and then it so often turns out that moment where you're able to almost just move with your body's own, I don't know, there's something magnetic between the world and your body, that happens when you kind of get out of the planning and into the gutsiness.
Yes. It's hard because we're sitting down so much these days, whether it's in an office or you're working from home and you're freelance. it's like we just become a brain, and that's it. And you don't feel the physicality of the self anymore. Just going outside and just standing there.
Yeah, I mean, it's so flat, you know. When you're working in an office, there's something so sort of flat and gridded about that. And yeah, getting out into the world and moving through space in a more sort of 3D way is just, it's inspiring. So many things happen through that.
Yeah.
It's funny, I feel like there is there's the other ink makers and pigment people, but there are also, I feel like there's also a few other scenes that I really cross over into. Like there's the foraging people, the mushroom people, definitely the chocolate makers. There's some great like witches. There's kind of a punk domestic scene that I'm really into. Like there are definitely, there's a kind of Venn diagram that natural ink making lives in.
This is Jason Logan, Guts and Glory, signing off.
This was Palette with Jason Logan. Refer to the show notes to further get to know our guest. Share your thoughts and show us some love by subscribing or get in touch to be featured on the podcast. Released every other Monday. Thanks for lending us an ear. Passing on the mic.